Morning, Your Honors. The matter before the court this morning is the case entitled In Re Grievance of David Roos, case number 24 AP 116. Representing the appellant, David Roos, is Karen Stuntz. Representing the appellee, the state of Vermont, is Jonathan Rose.
Thanks very much, and good morning, counsel. We'll hear from the appellant first, of course. Please introduce yourself, identify your client, and then proceed.
Good morning. My name is Karen Stuntz, and I am counsel for the appellant David Roos.
Thank you.
Your Honors, this morning we have a case where we are alleging that the state did not prove by a preponderance of the evidence that Mr. Roos's conduct violated the Vermont State Police Code of Conduct as to conduct unbecoming an officer, violation of the rules regarding truthfulness, or the Vermont Police State Directive regarding sexual harassment. In the submissions that we have submitted and in your review of the materials, we would ask that you consider the timeline of these events and many different timelines. So the timeline of Mr. Roos's career, he was at the Vermont State Police for 17 years in the K-9 unit, in the hostage negotiation and recreational enforcement team. He received only positive performance evaluations throughout the entirety of his career. He was promoted to the role of sergeant. There were 2 incidences on his, as part of his disciplinary record prior to his promotion as sergeant. And we would ask that you consider that in review of what we believe was unjust termination. In terms of the timeline,
consider his work history, his favorable work history in relationship to the allegations, or in favor of the potential late disclosures. I'm just a little unclear as to what you're asking on that statement.
Sure. We believe, Your Honor, in reviewing the Collar and Britt factors, that was not, in essence, weighed in Mr. Roos's favor, that he had a 17-year career with the Vermont State Police, that he had been promoted to the role of sergeant as patrol commander for the night shift in the St. Johnsbury Derby Barracks, and that only had he received positive performance reviews throughout his entire career. And so we're asking that that be considered in terms of whether his termination was just in consideration of what he was alleged to have done. And in addition to that, and hopefully that answered your question, in addition to that, in terms of the timeline of events, we would ask that you consider that these events took place during the COVID-19, or the alleged events took place during the COVID-19 pandemic. The first allegation, which allegedly occurred in December of 2020 with regard to Trooper Figueroa, who alleged that there was a comment regarding her ripped pants. We would ask you to consider the timeline that she then responded to a performance evaluation that Sergeant Roos entered some 8 months later, indicating that she thanked him for creating a fun working environment at the St. Johnsbury Barracks. And while she testified at the hearing that this wasn't intended for him, he in fact was the author of that document, and he was her direct supervisor at the St. Johnsbury Barracks. It can only have been him that she was responding to. And so that incident occurred in December of 2020. Fast forward to April of 2021, there was an alleged incident regarding Trooper Harvey, where she alleges that there were some comments made after those comments, and or something was put in her back pocket. She then seeks Mr. Roos out to engage in a bet regarding firearms qualifications. And again, the next timeline of events that I would have you consider, Trooper Plimpton's allegations, which occur in November of 2020. And you'll recall that Mr. Roos was suspended in December of 2021. And so Trooper Plimpton alleges that in November of 2021, there was a series of alleged comments, and we're asking you to consider that after he had reprimanded her for not appearing in a timely fashion to a motor vehicle crash, that these allegations came out. None of the other ones had been reported prior. They came out following a meeting with Lieutenant Munson. We would ask you to consider the timeline of when Mr. Roos was suspended in December of 2021 and then not interviewed until February of 22. and that he was not presented with any of the allegations or the names of the complainants. And if you read through the investigations, you will see that Mr. Roos tried to provide as much information as he could. He tried to suggest that there were means of trying to find out who was present during the alleged Figueroa incident, that he gave them recommendations that they could change, that they could look at badge access cards, that they could look at camera footage. And so when you look at the timeline of what has been alleged of these incidences, how the troopers responded, essentially that there was not a environment that was created that could have affected their work that would qualify this to sexual harassment. And then we'd ask you to create, look at the untruthfulness, that there were inconsistencies in the testimony.
All right. Thank you very much. Your time has expired. We'll hear from counsel for the appellee. Please introduce yourself, identify your client, and then proceed.
Good morning, Your Honors. This is John Roos on behalf of the state of Vermont. May it please the court, following a 3-day hearing, the Vermont Labor Relations Board upheld the Public Safety Commissioner's decision to discharge Mr. Roos for sexually harassing 3 female subordinates, for engaging in conduct unbecoming a Vermont State Police officer, and for being dishonest during an internal investigation into those allegations. Now, the board's decision, it's important for the court to remember, was supported by ample evidence at the hearing. The board held 3 days of hearing, was there for the testimony of witnesses, and heard all the evidence that my friend on the other side just relayed to the court. And the board reached its conclusions and about the conduct that Mr. Roos engaged in, and those conclusions were amply supported. So the 3 issues that the board highlighted in its decision were that when one female trooper ripped her pants on the job, Mr. Roos made some comments, she says vulgar comments, about whether he could date her sister. On another occasion, he placed something in the back pocket of a female officer as she was bent over a computer. There was another male officer present who witnessed this, and made clear that this female officer didn't consent to that touching, and that Mr. Roos himself called the incident inappropriate right after he did it. On a third incident, Mr. Roos asked a female subordinate when and to whom she lost her virginity. Now, these are just several of the examples that were highlighted by the board that show a consistent course of conduct of Mr. Roos engaging in behavior that was not appropriate for a supervisor in the Vermont State Police. He tries to minimize this conduct. He admits that most of it, at least to some extent, occurs. His defense was largely minimization, which is even more of a problem for the police department, as it reflects an inability to understand that this kind of what he characterized as joking, but I believe what these 3 female subordinates would consider sort of inappropriate behavior that made them very uncomfortable, is not the kind of behavior that we expect from state police supervisors. And I think even in fact during the hearing, Mr. Roos tried to excuse his behavior as team building, and at one point I think he even suggested that that he was just trying to desensitize these female officers, essentially because this is the kind of sexualized conduct they might experience in the field as police officers. And I think that all that just sort of even provides further support for the board's conclusions and the police commissioners, or I'm sorry, the Department of Public Safety commissioner's decision that he couldn't allow this sort of behavior to go on, and that this charge was appropriate to prevent Mr. Roos from engaging this sort of behavior in the future. And again, I think what we've just heard today is again just sort of a dispute of some of the evidence and asking the court to reweigh some of the evidence that was presented to the board in a light more favorable to Mr. Roos. And I think that the board heard all this evidence. It heard from the 3 female officers. It was there to witness their demeanors, to witness the impact that this behavior had on them. It heard from male troopers in the barracks who had also expressed concern about Mr. Roos' conduct and had witnessed these troopers, female troopers' reactions to that conduct, and witnessed that they were uncomfortable, and witnessed that it had impacted their ability to do their jobs. And so we ask that the court affirm the board's decision and decline Alan's invitation to reweigh the evidence that was presented to the board and uphold the board's discharge decision. Unless there are any questions, I'll leave it there, Your Honors.
Okay, thank you very much. Does the appellant have any time?
Appellant has no time remaining.